Hey guys, so today I'm gonna finish up the clip where Jordan Peterson was talking about was this well more or less debating with this feminist lady about patriarchy, hookup culture, and the differences between men and women, all that good stuff. Yeah, I'm gonna finish up the clip today, so let's get into it.
That perhaps you think that modern feminists think they have.
I don't
Do
know.
men need to change?
I don't know if women had it better than modern feminists think they had it. I think that if women had it hard in the past, which they certainly do, that the amount of that was attributable to male oppression is far smaller than the feminists claim, because nature had her hand in that. The average person in the Western world in 1895 lived on less than $1 a day in today's money. That's below the UN guidelines for poverty. So life was very hard for men and women for almost all of human history. And to view that as part of an oppression narrative on the part of men, I think, is one of the things that is very hard on young men, for example, when they're trying to take their place in the world. So how would men have to change because women have control over the reproductive function? That's an open-ended question. I don't know. Casual sex is much more available than it used to be. That's one way that men have been able to change. They haven't had to take on responsibility for adopting a long-term monogamous relationship in order to get sexual access. So that's a big change. It's also enabled men to not grow up to quite a great degree.
I'm not sure if you're welcoming that or
I'm not saying it's a good thing. It is very complicated.
So movements that bring that whole difficulty of the mating game or the hookup culture into the debate must therefore be a good thing, and presumably you would also, I shouldn't use presumably, but would you welcome that?
I think there's very little good about the hookup culture. I think there's very little good about casual sexual relationships. I don't think they're good for men or for women. And I mean,
where do you stand on the Me Too campaign? Good thing?
I think that it risks damaging the presumption of innocence. I mean, there's plenty.
Is there more to it than that?
Oh, sure. Women face the arbitrary admixture of sexual advance and workplace performance all the time. It's a very complicated thing to sort out. We don't know how to sort it out exactly because, NBC, for example, the American TV station, has made it policy that you're not to hug your coworkers, which may be true. Although I don't think it's the sort of thing that a corporation might be deciding for people. But we don't know exactly what the rules are for governing male and female behavior in the workplace because we've only been working together for about 35 years.
We don't know. After 35 years, wouldn't it be possible to figure something out?
Not when you're talking about a transformation in behavior that's that profound. I mean, we don't know how men and women can work properly together in the workforce. It's very complicated. Men don't know how to compete
millions
with
of
women.
men and women across the world go to work together day in, day out.
But you were the one who asked about Me Too.
You're the one who. Don't start with you're the one who.
Me Too is Me Too is an expression of the fact that men and women are having a hard time regulating their behavior in the workplace. It's the only reason I responded to that. Because the question was posed.
It's more broadly suggesting that some men are having a grave problem with it. What is the lesson of the Harvey Weinstein story for you?
Someone should have said something about Harvey Weinstein much sooner.
But we could start somewhere else. We could start with Harvey Weinstein was wrong to do what he did before we get other people should have spoken out. It's that's the secondary order issue.
Fair enough. I thought that went without saying. There are going to be psychopathic predators. They're going to exist. And what has to happen is that people have to stop them because they won't stop themselves. And so I thought that was sort of implicit in the statement. Obviously, he shouldn't have done what he did.
But you don't think that the culture in which he was operating, that there was particularly in his
in
world,
Hollywood?
In his world and in many other worlds, that there was a culture of, this guy's a powerful guy. He's the great silverback gorilla here. Let him get on with it.
Oh, I think that culture was everywhere in Hollywood, which is why I think
Not
it's
just
actually
in Hollywood?
quite... Well, Hollywood particularly. I mean, the casting couch idea has been around for a very long period of time. And I think that the Hollywood types who are all upset about this should look to their own devices with regards to the role they played in fostering the culture that managed that. So
it sounds like Hollywood itself, or the women, or who?
No, the entire culture. We were talking about culture.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's certainly that the Hollywood...
What's the sensible thing for women to do about Me Too, to your mind, and what's the less sensible thing?
That's a hard question. it isn't obvious to me exactly what men and women have to do in the workplace to make that kind of sexual predation much less likely, with also subjecting themselves to restrictions on the sexual aspect of their existence that would be unbearable. It's very difficult.
What would be unbearable about that?
How about everybody wears the same uniform to work?
I don't think
That's
I'd
what the Maoists. Well, look, if you want to eliminate the differences between men and women sexually at the workplace, you have to constrain the sexual differences. I mean, men wear suits to work.
Well, we
right?
don't have to eliminate the sexual differences for people to work together with respect.
You have to eliminate them to some degree.
Why? I'm
Well,
genuinely
because
puzzled.
the question here is, to what degree should sexually related behavior be impermissible at the workplace? Well,
Yes.
it depends on how you define it. Should you be able to dress attractively? And if you can dress attractively, what do you mean by attractively exactly? Like precisely. I got
Right,
into
so,
trouble.
I mean, I hope I dressed nicely today. You look very well dressed to me, right? You're a man, I'm a woman. We're both nicely dressed. Now we're getting on with the interview. What's the problem? Perspective
Well, the problem is the boundaries of what constitutes nicely dressed. Because because part of what constitutes attractiveness, part of what constitutes nicely dressed, is sexual attractiveness. Because you can't separate out human attractiveness, sexual attractiveness, from human attractiveness. And so then the question is, exactly where are the boundaries? And that's what the discussion is about. Where are the boundaries?
The dinner parties, which are described in a foreword to your book, where friends enjoy debates and disagreements. Do you think in the broader conversation we've lost that spirit, or in danger of losing that spirit?
Oh, I think we're always in danger of losing that spirit, right? Because lack of freedom is much more probable than freedom. We have to be very careful to maintain that, because it's always under threat. But and I do feel that it's under threat now. I think that people are very careful about what they say in ways that aren't good. I think the fact that many comedians won't perform on university campuses now is a very good indication of that. That's a canary in the coal mine scenario. That
But let's just stick for a moment on kind of polarization as it affects someone like you, or someone with your message. In one sense, we're arguing that polarization of society is a bad thing if people no longer have a shared space or shared understanding, even of debates and disagreements and nuance. And yet, aren't you part of that problem? You're absolutely of the culture that upvotes, that downvotes. Looking at the sort of sideline on one of your YouTubes, and there's a lot of Jordan Peterson destroys so and so, kills someone.
Yeah, well,
this seems to me a very odd and reprehensible kind of sort of consequence of some of the way that your argument is presented. And do you feel any responsibility there?
Well, I feel responsibility, I suppose. The question is, what what's the proper level of analysis? Let's say. Well, okay. So first of all, people are making 4,000 videos out of my videos a week on YouTube, and so we're going to expect that there's going to be a tremendous amount of variance in how people do that. And they're competing for views, just like the mainstream media is competing for views. And one of the ways to compete for views is to become sensationalistic and to capitalize on polarization. And I think that's a very bad idea. And I think a lot of that is happening.
Do you think you ever fall into that trap?
Ever? Sure. I think I fall into that trap, although I wouldn't say I do it to
When have you
drive
done that?
video. Well, because of my distaste for what's happening on the university campuses and my embarrassment at being associated with that, because of my academic standing, let's say, I perhaps become more irritable about the fact of identity politics than might be optimal. Although I think in the main I'm quite careful. And often under extreme duress, and I think that that's worked
So
to
what
my
have you
credit.
said? Have you felt? And I think this is a sort of social media environment sometimes pushes many of us in this direction. In fairness, what have you said then about identity politics, or possibly when you ended up in broad a big argument about trans rights? Have you said things that you regretted?
I may have become more emotional about things that might have been optimal. In terms of things that I've said, no, that's been okay so far. And
That's a trap. That is a trap. Jesus Christ. Yeah, but he handled it. I thought he was gonna say yes, but yeah, he handled it. But that was a trap.
I've been very careful about what I've been saying. And
do you think that people hear things the way that you see them? I just watched a lot, as you say, a lot of videos being made, and they're often sort of cut from lectures or appearances. But when you talk, say, about domestic violence, and there's a sort of thesis behind it, and I'm putting it in a bit of a nutshell here, so feel free to rephrase it, that men are, in the end, if men are pushed too far by a too aggressive a feminism, there will be a backlash, and that there is, there's a sort of undercurrent of violence, be it verbal.
Oh, that's a warning, that's a warning,
but it's
not a
it's a
commentary on the
warning that
utility
kind
of
of
that.
suggests that there may be sort of fault in those who push progressivism too far. They will get a backlash. Some people, of course, see that as a bit of a permissive environment for bad behavior.
Well, people tend to confuse describing the likelihood of something with supporting the fact that it exists. And I'm describing the likelihood of something, not supporting the fact that it exists. If you push too far on the left, you're going to get a backlash on the right. That's how things work. And this is just a derivation of that as far as I'm concerned.
How does that work in the context of domestic violence?
Oh, I don't think it's applicable in the context of domestic violence at all. I think those things are completely separate issues.
I mean, you were mentioning to me just as we were chatting.
And I was speaking only politically with regards to the backlash. That was a comment on political backlash. It had nothing to do with domestic violence. That's a whole different.
Did everyone notice what he's not actually writing on anything on the paper? I think he's drawing or sketching something. I don't know. My eyes keeps getting drawn to that. I don't know.
Issue.
But violence often pops up in your work as something you think drives things. That I think you've said in relations between men are regulated by a background threat of force, and in a sense, that's why men have difficulty with women. Is it really?
No,
so?
That's why men have difficulty with women who are completely out of control. But
who should control women?
Well, other women themselves, men, society, just like everyone is controlled. I mean, you're controlled by society. I'm controlled by society, and thank God for that. I mean,
it's funny. I mean, you described yourself as a liberal earlier, and I think a liberal doesn't think that a society controls women or men.
Well, let's say regulates. I'm a psychologist as well.
But what is an out of control woman? What is this creature? How do we know when we met one?
Well, I'm sure that you've met women in your life that acted towards you in a bullying and detestable manner. It's very difficult for women to cope with that because they don't have any real recourse. And female bullying can be unbelievably vicious. And usually it takes the shape of reputation destruction, innuendo, and gossip. It's well documented. It's very difficult to defend. No, men do it too, but men, no. But
the patterns, disproportionately women. In your view.
You see what she did? She asked him, what is this women that are out of control, this creature? She called it creature. And then he explains, and then she said, only women. Like, this is crazy. Only women. You asked the question, he answered.
You or not? Sorry.
Yes, disproportionately women. That's what the data indicate. I mean, if
but
men
where is the data on innuendo and gossip?
Well, it's among antisocial behavior among adolescents. It's a well-documented field. So because people look at aggressive and antisocial behavior in women and in men. And in women, it tends to take the expression of innuendo, gossip, and reputation destruction. And in men, it tends to take the form of outright physical aggression. There's a whole literature on that. It's not a surprise to anyone. This has been known for 30 years. I mean, the rates of antisocial...
I think the idea of the female gossip probably predates 30 years.
Well, it does.
By a long time, but that doesn't... doesn't make it gospel,
but
really,
people
does it?
No, it doesn't. But people have looked at how women express... Look, women have to express aggression somehow, unless you're willing to say that they're not aggressive. They tend not to do it physically, not to the degree men do, so they use other channels. And what other channels are there other than physical aggression if you're going to be aggressive? Well, you go after people verbally. You go after them with innuendo and gossip and reputation destruction. And that's how it works.
And just to be clear, that you think that's predominantly a female modus operandi?
It isn't that I think that.
Well,
it's that the clinical literature indicates that. It isn't that I think it.
Well, I'm not interviewing the clinical literature. I'm interviewing you. What do you think?
Well, I'm a psychologist and a scientist, and I tend to base my opinions on what I've read in the broad, relevant clinical literature. I'm not making this stuff up. I studied antisocial behavior for like 15 years. I'm actually quite an expert on it. And so we know that men are more likely to look at it this way. All right. Women are much more likely to try to commit suicide. and men are much more likely to kill themselves. And the reason for that is that men use lethal force and women don't. Now that's a big difference. Okay, so then you say, well, women manifest aggression towards themselves and to others, but they don't use lethal force. They don't use physical force the same way men do. So they have to do it some other way.
Why do
Well,
they
what are the
have
other
to do
ways?
something some other way? That like, you
Because
can take
people
your
are
Hobbesian
aggressive.
war against, so you're basically a Hobbesian. Life is
No, I'm
war of
half
all
and
against
half,
all.
half and half, half Hobbes, half Rousseau. That's why I'm not an ideologue, because I don't think that people are good or evil. I think they're both. I don't think that culture is security or tyranny. I think it's both. And I don't think that nature is benevolence or catastrophe. I think it's both. And that's why I'm not an ideologue.
I need you to cite Rule 9 because I've got 28 bits of paper here, but I'm just going to carry on in the meantime because we're getting towards the end and nicely warmed up. You rightly picked up on the disruptive effect of social media, but also the technological shifts in media and mass media consumption. My argument was that this might be, leading to a polarization. The people like you who are immensely successful within this milieu, also driving your book sales. You just I think, just as I'm talking to you, hit the top of the Amazon list here in the UK. But there is that, that point that you become part of the problem, that you've put your finger on yourself. You want people to get along together. You want men and women to sort of trade off. We don't agree entirely where these trade-offs are, but, we're here and arguing about it. And yet at the same time, you succeed most when you say something very provocative that goes viral. You think you're sort of trapped in a paradox.
I don't think that's when I succeed most. So, for example, one of the incidents that propelled me to success, let's say, in terms of public recognition in the UK, was my interview with Cathy Newman. And the reason that propelled me to success wasn't because I said something provocative, but because I refused under substantial duress to say anything provocative. And so the part of the reason that I've become popular to the degree that I have been is that I'm actually very good at keeping my temper under situations that would not, under situations where there's substantial reason not to, let's say. And I would also say that the good that I've done with regards to my online lectures far outweighs whatever harm might be done by the fact that people are cutting them and making provocative titles out of them and construing this as some sort of fundamental political war.
But it's not just other people, is it? It's if you look at something like the model that you partly use to promote your work is the crowdfunding site. So the more you incite a reaction, the more loyal your Patreon site, the more loyal the subscribers become, the more money is raised for causes that you want to promote.
No, that isn't how it works. The reason that, first of all, I give away all my content online for free. So the people who subscribe to Patreon are subscribing to nothing. They're supporting me, and they're not supporting me because of my political stance primarily. They're supporting me because they've watched my videos and they've been helped by them as individuals, and they're hoping that can happen to a lot of other people.
But if you want to give, excuse me.
Yeah.
If you see it as self-help and you want to give it away for nothing, then why bring money into the equation at all? And why have this sort of high octane sort of crowdsourcing does rely on people coming to you wanting to pledge their money? Why put money into it at all? Isn't this an area where the market might be better left out?
I am an evil capitalist after all, and I don't really make any apologies for that. I set up my Patreon site mostly out of curiosity because I've been interested for a long time in how creative people can monetize their creative productions, because that's actually part of my technical interest, because it's very hard to monetize creative productions because they have long-term benefit, but it's hard to show.
Why do you want to monetize?
Well, because I can do useful things with money, and partly because I'm curious, partly because I need to live, partly because my job was at risk for a long while and that's not going to happen to me again, partly because I had to give up my clinical practice because of other considerations, partly because I have a family, partly because I want to build an online university.
Is it about raising money for a cause, or is it about raising money for you?
Well, I don't separate myself from what I'm doing, so I can't really answer that question. I mean, for me, what am I going to buy, a yacht? No. I'm not a luxury kind of guy. I'm not looking to live the high life. I'm 55 years old, for God's sake. What would I do with that? I have lots of things that I would do with some money. One of the things I want to do is build an online university, but it's not the only thing I want to do. And so I would put the money to good use, I suspect, or at least to reasonable use. And the reason that people are providing me with this money, which they don't have to do, is because they hope that I'll continue to do what I'm doing. And that is exactly the reason they're providing it with me. And my leftist critics have been, been saying for consistently, it's actually quite comical. Well, look at all the money that Dr. Peterson is generating with his Patreon account. It's like, well, I'm not selling anything. All the stuff I do online is free. It's not even advertising supported. So if people want to support me on Patreon because they think that what I'm doing is helpful, then like more power to them as far as I'm concerned.
And do you feel that when the response that you get through that site and others, that your judgment is equally good when it comes to spotting sort of things that have gone too far in the sort of cant of the far left, and attitudes that come from the right, the far right, or alt-right, and I'm not mixing up these categories, you can differentiate between them. Do you feel that your kind of hearing works better in one direction than the other?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this week, for example, I was accused by a Jewish newspaper of harboring Nazi sympathies, which was rather miserable. But at the same time, an alt-right article came out today telling me that I was a stooge and a shill for the Jews. So, I figure I'm pretty much in the middle if I can attract that sort of criticism on both sides. And with regards to the right-wing issue, the right wing does not pose a threat to the integrity of universities in North America and Europe, but the left wing certainly does, and that's well documented, and not by me. There are no conservatives in universities, in the social sciences and the humanities. They don't exist, and that's not a good thing. And the radical left in universities absolutely exists and has utterly threatened the integrity of those institutions. And so to the degree that I've concentrated on the radical left, it's because the radical left has usurped the universities.
Although one might say in the global context, an authoritarianism which often tends rightwards is a threat to free speech, to universities,
absolutely.
to the roles.
Absolutely, and I've written extensively about right-wing authoritarian threats to liberty. Extensively.
Let's not ignore the big American elephant in the room. Donald Trump. Do you see him as an expression of a lot of
everything he said about liberals and their what is it called, the clause that they have on education? And I went through this. I thought people were joking when I heard the first time I heard this, and when I went to college, it was everywhere. I almost failed a paper because I wouldn't want to do write an essay on trans. I'm like, what the hell do I want to do? Like, I almost failed. Like, he almost failed me for that because I didn't want to do a paper on trans. I'm like, yo, get the fuck out of here. I don't want to do a paper on trans. This was, it's crazy in college. I was like, I don't know, 8 years ago. It is even worse now. It is way worse now.
Of the attitudes, the kind of unhappiness, discontent that you described in the book,
really.
Or something sui generis, something different. What do you make of it?
Well, first of all, Americans have voted 50% Republican and 50% Democrat for like 5 elections in a row. Nothing changed. The Republicans had Trump as a candidate and the Democrats had Hillary, and that's the way it turned out. And it was a 50-50 split. So I don't see that there's been a massive shift in the American political landscape.
Sort of different character.
Well, that's for sure.
Type of politician.
Yes, definitely. So. That's the interesting thing. Trump did something very interesting in the primaries and in his grip on the Republican nomination eventually. And I don't know really what to make of it. It's certainly to some degree the fact that he won was an expression of the fact that people were discontented with the Democrats' tilt towards identity politics because they lost a fair bit of their working class base. But I think that can be laid entirely at the feet of the Democrats. They made a big mistake doing that because the working class needs a political voice. And the Democrats decided to play identity politics instead.
So you blame them. Is anything wrong with Trump or anything he's negative?
Well, there's lots of things wrong with Trump. It doesn't take a genius to lay them out. Well, he's rather bombastic. He seems to be somewhat on the narcissistic side. He's certainly a master at manipulating the media. And he's a very peculiar character. It doesn't take a genius to list his faults. What Trump signifies, I don't know. I can't put my finger on him yet.
Let's conclude with.
I don't think he's the great coming of Satan, I don't think that America is any more polarized than it was in 1972. And the economy in the US is booming at the moment. And he hasn't got us into any particularly idiotic wars yet, so I'm pretty happy about that.
Liberalism, what needs it?
And she skipped all over that. She skipped it. Man,
How does it need to change? You said
when you hit them with facts, they don't have a comeback. That's the only way to debate these liberals, feminist people, like all of them, all these progressives. Hit them with facts, tell them 2 + 2 is 4. They don't have a comeback because everything progressive, everything liberal is based on emotion. How I feel, how this makes me feel. That's all it. That is all. How things make them feel. Once you hit them with facts, they don't have a comeback to it. Mm.
earlier on that you were a classic liberal. We tussled a bit about what that might mean in terms of what causes you supported.
It needs to dissociate itself from the radical left, which it refuses to do. It won't undertake the conceptual difficulty of deciding when the left has gone too far.
And I've got to ask you, have you got a favorite feminist?
Do I have a favorite feminist? I don't think of things that way. I'm not a favorite of ideologues. Do I have a favorite admirable woman? Who would be my favorite admirable woman?
I think he's sketching something on that paper. I don't think he's writing anything. I think he's just sketching. I think, yeah, I think is what I do that sometimes. Try to, it's like a stress relief. Yeah, I do that sometimes.
I'm sorry. I often have a difficult time bringing names to mind. The woman who established nursing as a profession in Britain.
Florence Nightingale.
Yes, Florence Nightingale. It's like good for Florence.
She thought at one point, I think men were unsuited to nursing because she had gender stereotypes. Shouldn't we be telling her off?
Well, some men are unsuited to nursing and some aren't.
And any unlikely heroes or heroines?
Oh, I'm a big fan of Tom Waits.
Tom Waits.
I think we can agree on that. Jordan Peterson.
All right, this is the end of it, I think. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I like the video. I like the way he calmly, laid out his points, just like that. Kathy Newman. I haven't seen that interview. I'm gonna do a reaction to it. But I heard a lot of. I think that's what that Kathy Newman interview is one of the foundations of his rise to popularity, and I'm gonna do a reaction to it. But yeah, I like this. I like this interview. I like the way he calmly laid out his points. I like it. Yeah, I'm gonna do a reaction to that Newman's interview. And okay, so if you like this video, if you like the clip I just showed, yeah, leave a like, leave a comment. I want to see your comments down below, and yeah, and then subscribe. Yeah, have a good night.